Hey guys, so the 4080 16 GB is out. I guess there would be just one 4080 right now, and as a 4090 owner, I'm here to give you my perspective of the 4080, right? So let's just go to the 4080 websites. I think in this video we'll cover all these points. I do not have the 4080 card physically, but I'll be able to give you a definite answer whether to buy this card or not. Okay, so we'll go I think in this fashion. We'll just do this together. Okay, so review part would be smaller. It won't be much bigger. I'll separate it out into objective and subjective parts. Yeah, so the second part would be we'll compare this to the 4090, and the third part would be should we buy it, and the last part would be versus 7900 XTX and conclusion, right? Cool. So let's just start with the specs of the card. So we'll just go to the GeForce RTX 4080 web page, and as you can see, this is the web page of official Nvidia card. So it has around 10,000 CUDA cores, a base clock of 2.5 gigahertz and everything. It has 16 gigabyte of GDDR6X memory with 256-bit bus width. Now this is slightly lower than 4090, which should matter. 16 GB is more than enough for any game now, today or in the future, even at 4K, right, with all the ray tracing and everything turned on. So these are the basic specs. I'll link this in the comment section so you can go through it. Yeah, so I think the recommended power supply is 750 watt, but you should be able to run it at 650 as well, because this is not a lot of power draw, right? So yeah, that's that. Now coming to the price of this card in India is like 1,16,000 officially, but I could not find cards lesser than 1,20,000. Even the cheaper 3D ones were 1,20,000. So that you can assume 120 to be the price, right? So let me open a different window for this. Specs, amazing. Price 1,20,000. 120k INR. This is slightly challenging, but it's a beast of a card, so you can sort of justify it, but we'll talk it about more in versus the 4090, right? Now coming to the review part, review is pretty simple. If you want to see this objectively, this card is not meant for 2K, or even it's not meant for 1080p gaming. You can use it as a 2K card, but as an end game 2K card. But yeah, no point in using this for 1080p. So we'll just go to tech power ups, average FPS benchmarks, and we'll see how it goes, right? So okay, if you go over here, you can see that on an average at 1080p it performs at around 200 fps, and 4090 performs at 215 fps. You can clearly see that this sort of is a CPU benchmark, CPU bottleneck, right? These cards can definitely perform more, but they are not able to do those because 1080p is a very small resolution, and you would need a very fast CPU to get more frames out of it. Now coming to 2K resolution, 2K is where this card sort of still I would say CPU bottleneck, but yeah, in some of the games like Cyberpunk and Control, with all the ray tracing on, you can you can take use of this and max out your high refresh display. But I would still suggest to buy this card for 4K gaming. But here's where 4090 makes more sense over this card. We'll talk about that in versus the 4090. But yeah, this is the objective review. I will put this link as well, and you can see that in as you go up the resolution as well, right, the difference between 4080 and 4090 basically keeps on increasing. So here the difference is 30 fps, here the difference is 20 fps, even though the fps numbers are larger, right? So 20 would mean small in terms of relative performance, and here the difference is even less, 14 fps. So I think if you are planning to buy 4080, make sure you are gaming at least at 2K resolution, or I would suggest more ultra wide 2K would be the best resolution for this, like 3440 by 1440. So that's the best use case for this card. And yeah, and I think 4K it should be able to handle it, but yeah, some games would stutter, especially the Unreal Engine 5 games coming up in the future, but DLSS should help in those cases as well. right? Now coming to the subjective part, I think I have few points. Number one, it's a beast of a card. On an average, 20 to 30% faster than 3090 Ti, which is a big deal because 3090 Ti was a flagship card. And I think in terms of 3080, which is the direct predecessor, it's like 50% fast. 3080. But here's where the problem is, right? So the price has increased like way too much, right? It's like 700 versus $1200, right? Or I personally bought my 3080 for 62,000, and this card is now 1,20,000, so almost double, right? Now I bought the FE card, but 3080 well, non AIB cards were actually selling for around 80,000. So 80,000 versus 1,20,000. So price would be 80k versus 120k INR, which is a very big deal. So that's a big highlight of this card, which is sort of keeping it back. Otherwise this is a great card. It has great performance, great power to wattage rating, and efficiency is out of the charts, right? It sometimes takes only 250 watts. But here's my problem with this, right? Let us suppose you already have a 3080, or I think if you have cards below 3080, let's say you have 3060, 3070, then it would make sense to buy the 4080 because that would give you a significant jump. But if you already have a card like 3090 Ti, I don't think buying a 4080 makes sense. You should directly jump to 4090. But we'll talk more on that about in the if whether to buy this card or not. So overall review for me for this card is obviously it's very fast. It's very power efficient. I think it's slightly more power efficient than 4090, but if thermal limit, power limit 4090 to 70%, then that card is more power efficient. But yeah, this card is again very power efficient, and I think they overdid the cooler on this. Cooler on FE4080 is overdone. You did not actually require that big of a card that it's actually equal to 4019 size. They could have gone with a smaller sized card, and that should have worked easily. Because I think with my 3080, it's quite smaller than 4090, right? And that card used to run at around 75 degrees C maximum, even the FE card. And if you bought an AIB card, they used to run lower than that. So I think they overdid a bit on the cooler side. Yeah. Okay, so now let's move on to the next section. I think this is something that major reviewers have not covered yet. I think this is the main part of the review, right? You can watch reviews at 10 different places, and almost all of them are similar. It's not similar, I would say, almost the same. They just do benchmark numbers and everything. So yeah, and benchmarks would obviously be same no matter how different you test it out. Obviously there might be a difference of 5% to something depending on what CPU you use, but overall it's the same. But yeah, now I think first point, let me just first open GPU Z and show my 4090 specs, and we have the 4080 specs on the screen, so we would compare them side by side, right? Let's see if we have the die size over here. I think we don't. Okay, no worries. Cool. Let me just minimize this. Yeah. Okay, so first point is why 40 versus 4090, right? Okay, so I think the biggest reason is among the latest card launch, obviously we have the AMD cards coming up, right? But I think still among the new cards, 4090 is a much better competition for 4080 and not the 7900 XTX. I will touch up more on this when I talk about 7900 XTX and whether you should buy the 4080 or not. But for in comparison to 4090, why you should do it is because they are sort of in a similar price bracket. Now when I say price bracket, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that when you're already spending over 120k on a graphic card, right, you can sort of extend it to 160k. You can maybe extend your EMIs a bit, but they sort of fall in the same category, right? these are sort of flagship cards. Now 4090 brings a lot of value to the table, which I'll add to this. Number one point is, I think in the last section I covered, is that it's like 4080 is like 50% faster than 3080, and 4090 is 100% faster than 3080. I have experienced in it. My 3080, in my personal experience, I am getting around 2.1 to 2.2x performance than 3080, right? So that's a big difference, and that's a big difference in experience. So what I mean by experience, for example, my 3080 used to give in Cyberpunk, with all the ray tracing on and with DLSS, I think it used to give like 30-35 FPS, right, at the max settings. Now my 4090 gives at around 70 with the max settings, right? So 35 to 70 is a major 35 to 70 is a major difference. Like you do not need any sort of motion blur itself. So motion blur, people are against motion blur, but motion blur does smoothen out the feeling of responsiveness, right? So at 70 the game is very playable, you feel it fine. It's not a fast paced game like Warzone or something. You enjoy it. But let's say you go from 35 to 50% more. So 50% of 35 would be 17.5, right? You add 17 to it, it's now in the 50 range, low 50 range. Let's say 4080 gives you 50 FPS with DLSS quality. I'm not talking about DLSS performance or something, because they for me sort of degrade the visual quality. So 50 FPS, yeah, definitely 50 is way more than 35, but 50 still feels a bit lagging, right? It does not feel that smooth as 70. So why don't just make the jump and go to 4090 instead of 4080? So that's why 4090 comparison to 4090 makes a lot of sense, right? And I think in last section we also talked about the size of the graphic card. I'll just show you my 4090 versus 3080. So this was my 3080 FE, and this is my new 4090 Asus TUF card, right? So you can see that this is a very big card. I have a Lion Lee 011 Dynamic XL. Still, it's sort of, the cable from this card, that 12 VH power cable, that almost touches the glass, right? It's very tightly against the glass. So 4080 should have been a card of 3080 size, and that would have worked great, because these are very efficient card. They do not need so much thermal output. Okay, 4090, I guess you may say that because this card actually goes to 600 watts in overclocking, so you might need that, but there's no performance gain beyond 450 watts, right? So I think they overdid the cooler on 4080. And if we just go to this and see the 4090 versus 4080 FE, we go to Google Images, and okay, I don't see a side-by-side comparison, but yeah, I think 4080 and 4090 are almost similar in size. They are exactly same, I would say. So I think they overdid that, but yeah, nonetheless, let's just go on to 4090 and 4080 specs first, and we'll go from over there, right? I have separated it out into two things, because 4090 is almost in similar price and gives a 4K experience like never before. Yeah, let me just do word wrap as well. Okay, yeah, that's it. So I think, yeah, that's the case for me. I think you should buy 4090. The short answer is you should buy 4090 if you are looking for 4080. But we will talk more about it on should you buy it, right? Because I think for some user that has a budget of around 1 lakh, extending to 1,60,000 might not be possible, but extending to 120 might be possible. In that case, 4080 does make sense. Another case where 4080 does make sense over 4090 is if you want to game at ultra wide, that is 3440 by 1440, right? In that case, 4090 is just overkill, and it's almost always CPU bottleneck. Even if you see my video on Cyberpunk, my 4090 is bottlenecked at even 4K with a 5800X. So 5800X is not the top of the line right now, but it is a very powerful CPU, right? Still, it is CPU bottlenecked even at 4K. So you can imagine what would happen at ultra wide 2K, right? So I think in that case, 4080 does make sense. But you know what? Let's just go into the major differences and why 4090 sort of kind of makes more sense, right? Okay, so this is my GPU-Z, this is that. So I think number one major difference is 6000 more CUDA cores, 30 plus more powerful than 4080 in raster and 40+% more than 4080 in ray tracing. Now the quick rant over here. What the major reviewers do is that I think they do not know how percentages work. So what they would be, they sort of downplay 4090. So what they say is, let's say in a game 4080 does out 80 FPS, right? And in a game 4090, in the same game 4090 makes an average of 100 FPS. So the difference is 20 FPS. Now if you say how much faster 4090 is than 4080, so you will have to take 80 FPS as the denominator. So the percentage increase would be 25. So you would say 4090 is 25% powerful faster than 4080. But if you flip it and you say that 4080 is X% slower than 4090, now you would take the denominator as 4090. So it would be 20 by 100. So it would come out to be 20%. So you would say 4080 is 20% slower than 4090. See, 4090 is 25% faster than 4080, but 4080 is 20% slower than 4090. So it's sort of downplaying how fast the 4090 actually is. Now if you would say that 20-25% almost feels the same, but if you compare it to 3080, right, in a game 3080 let's say 3080 gives out 100 FPS, and we know that in the same game 4090 would give around 200 FPS. So the difference is 100 FPS. But if you say 3080 is slower than 4090, then the percentage would be 50%, because 3080 is 50% slower than 4090. But if you do the other way around, 4090 is 100% more faster than 3080, right? So that is one point you must note down in the benchmarks. If what's the card after than. So my recommendation to everyone is take the lowest performing graphic card and then compare it to that card, so that this sort of miscommunication is not there, right? Yeah, so that's that. I think this is the one of the major differences. Second major difference is, a lot of people are talking about is 16 GB versus 24 GB. I don't think that's a major difference. I would put it into minor difference. So 16 GB versus 24. Now unless you are a video creator or some ML engineer or somewhere where you actually require 24 GB, 16 GB is way more advanced, because the most I have seen is 12 GB, around 12 GB in Cyberpunk, with ray tracing at Psycho and settings at Psycho with no DLSS, right? If you turn on DLSS, the GPU VRAM uses come down, right? Because you are internally rendering at a lower resolution. Other than that game, no game sort of touches that VRAM uses. So your 16 GB is pretty much safe. But one major difference that I will touch upon is 256 bit versus 384 bit. Yeah, so 256 bit versus 384 bit is a major difference. So I think on top of my hand, versus 1045 Gbps. Let me just do this. Okay, so the 4080 has a 256 bit memory bandwidth bus and 384. So their effective memory speeds are this. Now what is this bit width, right? So what happens is, for communication inside any microprocessor, right? So GPU is also a microprocessor. There are bus which can so these buses are not actual buses, but these are like semiconductor pathways where you can transfer the data, right? So 384 bit means that at a single transfer they can transfer 384 bits of data versus 256 bits, right? So this coupled with your memory clock speed, which you see 22 Gbps, or which you can also overclock in your MSI Afterburner, you actually get your effective memory bandwidth, right? So the greater this is, the better the faster the data communication is. And I think this plays a major role when you bump up the resolution, right? So that is the case, that is the reason why at 4K the difference between 4090 and 4080 actually increases. Yeah, I forgot this. I should write at 4K, right? And one more thing to touch upon over at this point is, I think with the new CPUs coming out, 7900X 3D and everything, this slightly might increase by 5%, right? Because I feel like 4090 is still CPU bottlenecked at 4K even, and I think in ray tracing it clearly stomps on 4080 due to these many CUDA cores, right? There's no, in automotive industry they say there's no replacement for displacement. Similarly, there's no replacement for actual core count, right? Although it does not scale one to one, but yeah, I think it should have, if it was a 1 to 1 scale, it should have been more 60%, right? But I think we do definitely get 40 to 45%. I think I have seen 50, even 50% gains in some of the games like Cyberpunk, where ray tracing and everything is maxed out. So that is something, that's a very big number. That's why I would say that you just buy the 4090 if you are playing at 4K, right? Now, the second difference is what I saw over the specs is 4080 has a faster memory out of the box. So it's like rated at for 24 Gbps versus 22.4 Gbps on your 4090. But that's the sort of thing. I feel like they are sort of, since both of them have GDDR6X memory, I feel they are sort of using the same memory modules, only that Nvidia, because so what happens is like the more memory you have, the more the memory controller has to work, right? So stabilizing higher frequencies is a bit challenging with more memory. You can see that in your CPU as well. If you have 32 GB RAM versus 16 GB, 16 GB would slightly clock higher if you overclock them, right? But what I have seen is, let me just open my MSI Afterburner. My card actually does 2000 megahertz bump on memory clock. If you can see my cursor, right, easily it's stable in every benchmark, every game. And on Reddit also I have seen that every card is doing at least 1500 megahertz plus on the memory clock, right? So it effectively bumps mine to 20.4 Gbps after overclock. So what I don't know if there's a headroom for overclock for 4080's memory as well, but I feel like the memory bandwidth is all the memory speed, right? Not the effective speed, but I think the memory speed is almost the same and shouldn't be considered as a difference, right? Okay, cool. Now, rest everything is similar, right? This is the main part. I think this is the main difference in specs. Now, the second thing is, last thing I want to talk about is subjective feel, right? Okay, what do I mean by subjective feel? By subjective feel, I sort of mean how do you feel after using a 4090 versus 4080, right? As I talked about it, if you are jumping from, like I did, I jumped from 3080 to 4090, that's a way big difference. I can feel the difference, I can feel the power. So I was playing God of War, the 2018 version. I was getting 60 to 70 FPS with 4K maxed out on 3080. It's a good experience for that particular game, but now I am getting like 130 to 150 FPS. That's a whole different level. Like I have a 4K monitor with 240 Hz display. I can sort of fully maximize. If I turn on DLSS at quality, it goes 200 plus, right? So I can fully maximize it. But you don't feel a difference between 150 and 200 FPS. But 60 versus 70 versus 150, that's a whole big difference. Now, if you see the numbers, right? In terms of 3080 versus 4080, with the 4080 you would be able to jump to 105 FPS. That would also feel significant, but 150 feels a bit different, right? So I think the jump from previous hardware with a 4090 is massive. So yeah, that's all about it. And I think pricing for me for 4090 is definitely high, but I feel like the 4090 justified it. As I talked about Cyberpunk as well, right? 50 versus 70 FPS, that's sort of what 4080 versus 4090 would get you, is a big difference, right? So 50 difference of 20 FPS is almost about 50% increment over 4080 of 4090, right? So that's a big difference in your feel, your gameplay. That would, so what would happen if you bought a 4080 instead of 4090, especially at 4K, is right? You will get a jump, but it won't be that significant that it will make you, oh, what happened, right? Like 4090 made me feel, oh my god, this is great, right? This is great, this is next level. That feel you won't get with the 4080. especially if you are moving from a card that was already 3080, 3090 or 3090 Ti, right? I did not mention 3080 Ti because that's similar to 3090, right? So if you already have a 3080, 3090 or 3090 Ti, making jumping to 4080 doesn't make sense. And I think nobody with for 3080 or 3090 or 3090 Ti will ever jump to 4080. They will directly jump to 4090. If you had a card slower, then I would say even if you had a 3070, right, jumping to 4090 makes more sense. But yeah, again, if you are playing at 2K only, then I would say just buy the 4080, right? So I think, yeah, that's the major difference between 4090 and 4080, pricing being one. But what I feel like, the extra price is like 30% more, and you get more than that in terms of performance, right? So 4090 sort of justifies its price. Yeah, cool. That's it. Now we'll move to the next section. Okay, let's now just move to the next section of should you buy it or not. I think our video is already long. We'll try to cut this one short and make it very objective so that you get a definite yes or no answer, and then we'll move to the final 7900 XTX and conclusion part, right? Ah, you game at 4K, buy the 4090. So I'm not considering if you have the budget or not, right? If you do not have the budget, then it does not make sense to basically have this argument. So if you have the budget, let's say you have a budget of 120k only, then just buy the best performing card at 120k. That's not an issue. The thing is that you are concerned about a bit of value as well, but I think you can extend the budget. In that case, this would help you, right? If you game at 2K or ultra wide 2K, ultra wide, right? So wait for 7900 XTX. Cool. Second is, if you game at, if you already own 3080 plus cards, buy the 4090. Okay, cool. If you are tight on budget but can buy a used card, buy 3090 or 3090 Ti used. So yeah, so this is the basic gist of this card, right? Otherwise, fifth is, I'll talk about fifth a bit later on. So if you game at 4K, right, and you want to buy a card, you want the best of the best, just buy the 4090. 4K, there is no comparison, right? If you game at 2K or ultra wide, 4080 does make sense, but I would like you to wait for 7900 XTX. There's a case where 7900 XTX might not be the right fit for you. I'll talk about it in the conclusion and 7900 XTX part. Now, if you already own a 3090, 3080, 3090, 3090 Ti, I would just say tell you to buy the 4090 and not buy the 4080. Just if you don't have the money, just collect for a bit and just buy the 4090. That would be a major big difference. If you're tight on budget now and you can buy a used card, just buy the 3090 or 3090 Ti used. 3090 in India is like 55,000 INR compared to 1,20,000. With the rest of 65,000, you might be able to build the rest of the system completely, right? And with 3090 and 4080 in comparison, you are like 25-30% maximum difference in performance, right? And I think that is justifiable. If you are on 2K, 3090 is still a card, right? 3090 is still a beast. If you are on 4K, then 4080 might make more sense, but if you are already tight on budget, 3090 will. I was using my 3080 at 4K, so 3090 will definitely work at 4K as well. You might have to tune down some settings, but yeah, that's it, right? So keeping this very simple, this is your guide. Just follow this. Just follow if you have yes or no for this, and just buy it. Now, one special case where 4080 does make sense, and if you do not have, okay, let's talk about that in the conclusion part. Yeah. So we'll just end this part over here and this keeping this very small. This is it. This is your basically decision tree to buy the card or not. Okay, now let's come to the last part of our video, which is 7900 XTX and conclusion. So I think there's just 1 month left for 7900 XTX to come. Number one point is AMD will be faster in raster. So yeah, so 7900 XTX will definitely outperform 4080 in rasterization, no doubt about it. But it will be slower in ray tracing. Definitely will be. It definitely will be slower in ray tracing. They are saying that there's a jump of like zero 0.5 or 0.66, and 6950 XT could not even perform equal to 3080, right? So they will definitely be slower in ray tracing. My overall versus for 7900 XTX is that if you do not play a lot of ray tracing titles, it's better to buy the 7900 XTX. If you play some ray tracing titles, 4080 does justify its cost, right? Because if there's no performance in that regard, right, what will you do? So let's say if a new game comes out and it looks way good, like Cyberpunk looks way good in ray tracing, and your card cannot perform at 4K or high resolution, that's $1,000 waste, right? So you can argue that okay, 1700 XTX does save you $200 against that 4080, but what will you do with that $200? Will you buy ray traced hardware acceleration hardware for $200? No, right? You won't get that separately. So in that case, 4080 does make sense over the 7900 XTX. But if you feel like, oh, ray tracing is okay, you do not need it. Cyberpunk at Ultra without ray tracing also looks great, and I can maybe turn down a few ray tracing settings overall to get the FPS. Then yeah, 1700 XTX does make sense. It will save you a lot of money. But otherwise, no, it does not make sense. 4080 makes sense if you want to play ray tracing titles. That's the gist of all the Nvidia cards, right? And now I think that's it. That's it. You just have to figure out if you want the ray tracing features or not. And DLSS 3 is also a game changer. And now AMD and Intel are also working for frame generation technologies, but I think I'm pretty safe to say that Nvidia in the recent years, let's say coming 3 to 4 years, Nvidia will stay ahead in this, frame generation techniques, frame upscaling, which is DLSS, basic DLSS. They will stay ahead in these technologies, and if AMD will not be able to catch up. They did launch FSR 2.1, but that does not catch up DLSS quality in terms of image quality, and right, they did have managed to catch up in performance. That's also not exactly, but yeah, image quality is still way better in DLSS quality. So I think DLSS 3 is a major selling point for 40 series cards, and you won't be able to get that with 7900 XTX. FSR 3 is coming, but I don't think that would be able to match what Nvidia will bring to the table. So Nvidia has been ahead in terms of software, and they sort of will remain ahead. So yeah, if you want a ray tracing graphic card, just buy a 4080. I would say just buy the 4090. So conclusion, this will be the shortest part of the video. Buy the 4090. So this is my conclusion. Simply buy, if you are out in the market for a 4080, just buy the 4090, unless you have a very tight budget and you do not want to buy a used card. And okay, unless you have a very strict budget and you cannot buy used, and ray tracing is everything for you, buy the 4080. So yeah, if you cannot, ray tracing is everything, and you cannot wait for 1 month for 7900 XTX to come out, just buy the 4080. You cannot buy a used card, buy the 4080. If you can buy the used card, buy a 3090 or 3090 Ti. If you have a very strict budget and you cannot extend from 120k INR to 160, just buy the 4080. Elsewise, buy the 4090. I spent a lot of time making this video. Yeah, if you like this, please give it a subscribe and like. And I do have 3080 with me, 3070 and 3060 with me, and 4090 of course, and my 5800X. Do let me know in the comments if you want a different, you know, video comparing them, or any review on that card as well. Thank you.